So by now we have our sample app which we have created. So it was created as a lecture 7. The app doesn't do much, but it has a launch screen which we gave it as a different color than the main storyboard. And then the main storyboard just say hello world. But from here on, we were also able to go forward and deploy this app onto a real device. And this is a separate video on that one without actually having the Apple developer license, and everything checks out. Now I'm going to assume that I have an app which is ready, and assume this Hello World app is a really cool app that I want to submit to Apple for App Store review. The question which comes is that how do I submit the app to Apple for review? One side note is that Apple reviews every app which is submitted by the developers. It reviews them to ensure that the apps actually add value. And if Apple deems the app doesn't add value, it's just a value wrapper, for example, or it's the internal app required for your enterprise and doesn't really adds any value for the public, then the app will be rejected. For your enterprise apps, you can go forward and submit your apps for enterprise into your enterprise app store. You don't need it on the public app store. There are other reasons for which the apps can be rejected, and this is a separate video which we'll be doing covering out those criteria. But for now, let's assume that this app is good enough, and this app is what you want to submit to Apple for review. Now, how do you submit it? You have the app running, it's running in simulator, it's running on device. But how do you actually submit these pieces of code to Apple? You should just zip them and send them across. Um, on Apple's word, everything gets archived and it's a compiled binary code, not extra source files. The compiled binary code, along with its assets, gets archived, it's a zip basically, into a file named IPA. Now, IPA stands for iPhone Archive, iPad Archive, and so on, but it's called IPA. Now, how do I generate the IPA? Well, so far I was selecting my target, pointing it to one of the simulators, and then running against the simulators, and everything was working great. I'm just going to run it once more. I didn't do much, but it was working great. Now, how do I go forward and archive it? The way you do it is that just like product build, you can do product archive. But if you go forward and now click on product, you don't see the archive option. It's hidden. And the reason is that your target is a simulator. And if you target a simulator, the archive option will be hidden. So you need to choose any iOS device, which is ARM64 architecture. Now you click on product, you see the option to archive. So you can go and click on it. And now you can see it's building the product for archiving. So here we go. Here's our archive, which is running. Now I can go forward and press the validate app button. It would work if I would have had the real Apple developer license. I do not. So if I click on it, I will get the message saying that, okay, I'm not enrolled in the Apple developer program. But if you were submitting to App Store, you need a proper paid membership, and then you will be able to validate your app even before submitting to the App Store. And you should, because that will point out some errors which probably are not occurring in your simulators and while generating the archive, but Apple will see those errors and can reject your app. So do validate them. You can also download debug symbols for your existing submitted apps, and you can choose to distribute your app. Now, if you choose to distribute your app, there are a bunch of options, right? You want ad hoc to install on any designated devices. You want to do an enterprise development or an App Store Connect. And here I want to do an App Store Connect. I will do the next. There's an option to upload. So this option to upload or export, which is I can do upload, which simply can go to AppStore and submit it. Of course, I cannot because I'm using my free account. I cannot upload it. But if you were using a paid account, you could have just gone through next and submitted your app. Other one is the export option, but again, it's not enrolled, so it will get added out here. But the point is, it's so convenient. If you are a single developer or a handful of developers and one of the developers is submitting to the App Store, it's very neat. You get the latest code. You simply come to your Windows organizer. Again, I will show you. You come to Window Organizer. And then, just in case you have already archived and you don't want to do it again, just Window Organizer. And you can go forward and distribute your apps, validate your apps. Now the problem starts occurring when you are not just a one member team and it's a bigger team, so it's like 10, 20 developers and so on. Then you can't really rely on individual developers submitting to apps. First of all, the individual developer now has certificates and profiles of the App Store, which you really do not want. What if he leaves the company, and what if something bad happens? then who has those profiles. Second thing is that you don't want to rely on an individual developer, making sure that okay, they're always pulling the latest code from the Git and then going forward and compiling and distributing, and they're not going to make those mistakes. You want your archive to be generated using continuous integration and continuous delivery system, CI/CD. And most of the CI/CD systems run on Jenkins. And in this scenario, what you can have is that you can have a Mac OS server, and it's not the software app for the server, but you can have a Mac machine which acts as a server, and it's running the Jenkins instance on it. Now, Jenkins can have scheduled jobs, can manually trigger jobs, but in all those cases, you're configuring some script. So you are building on the remote server where your first script will pull the latest content from Git, and it's assuming that it's under some release branch. Then you need to compile it using some command line arguments, and we're going to see how we can do so. So for this sample app, I have saved this sample app on my desktop. So I'm going to go there. Okay, so there it is. I go to lecture 7. Okay, all good. Now here I want to go forward and generate my IPA. So yeah, I can do that even with my free account, and I'm going to show you how. First thing that I'm going to need to do is that I need to build my source code. And for that, I need to know my project, which I know, lecture 7.xc Xcode project, so that I know. But other thing I need to know is what a scheme I'm using. And first of all, if you're not familiar with schemes, schemes are basically configurations that you have done is when you're truly doing the build, what build options you want to use for that particular build. And you can configure multiple schemes for your project. The place where you can go forward and see those schemes is product again. So you go to lecture 7, product. You go to scheme and you can go forward and choose to manage schemes or edit a scheme. Now I go to manage schemes so I can see a list of my schemes. By default, I had one created, which was lecture 7. I could definitely hit the plus and create more. But for this conversation, we're just going to go forward with the default scheme. I can select it and choose to edit the scheme. Now, when I choose to edit the scheme, at that point in time, you can see there are a bunch of options that are presented to me. There's build, run, test, profile. So when I'm doing the build, all these targets will be executed. So analyze step, test step, run step, profile step, and archive step. I can choose which ones to ignore by unchecking the checkbox if I want to, but for now, I just want all of them to be executed. I also identify which executable I want to be created, and if there are any arguments that I want to be passed as part of the build step. And of course, tests are heavily encouraged. We'll do separate videos on how to do test automation and so on. And of course, static analysis if we want to do, but those will come later. But for now, there is a scheme which is created. It's called Lecture 7. You can go forward and create your own schemes. You would need that for actually creating the IPA from the command line. Okay, so now I will go forward and build. So for that one, let's clear my terminal. And I will go forward and first go to the directory where the project is present. Then I will execute Xcode build command. And I will specify which project I want to build. And in this case, it's going to be lecture 7.xcode project. I need to specify the scheme, and I have already checked the scheme. The scheme is called lecture 7, so it's there. I need to specify the archive path, the full path of where the archive needs to be present, along with the name of the archive. So for my purposes, I'm just going to call it lecture7.xc archive. Okay, now I am going to go forward and tell the command actually I'm trying to archive. It's going to go forward and now compile all the source code and compile the asset catalog, and eventually going to code sign and generate the archive. Let's open the directory and see what happened. So I come in here and I go to the build directory and I see that there's XC archive which is now present. So all good. But I told you about the IPA, that we actually go forward and publish the IPA, not XC archive. So what are they, as you would have guessed, there are additional steps which are involved here, but they're pretty simple. There's a set of scripts that I want to execute. But at present, I have the archive ready now. Now what I need to do is that once I got the archive, it's available. I need to export this archive to an IPA. And as I do export an archive to an IPA, I need to specify what configurations or what parameters, arguments I want to use for doing that export. And those are specified by a file name export options plist. For the purposes of this demo, I am going to keep things very simple. And there's a big list of parameters that you can specify. This is not an exhaustive list again. I can go forward and specify a really long list of parameters and you should read about them. But at a very simple level, you want to compile bitcode, and our another video covers why bitcode is so important. You want to specify your method is production or development. For us, it's development. Your signing style, I'm using automatic. I'm not having any production profiles and certificates with the team identifier, which I need to specify. I would let Xcode manage my automatic signing. I want to strip Swift symbols so that no hacker can actually get any information out of the device, even if they're running on a rooted device. And then there is the thinning piece which is involved. And for app thinning, all I am saying is that thin for all variants. And again, there's another section which talks more detail about app thinning, very important, so that it's actually what the download which our end user sees is the minimum possible device as minimum possible size as applicable to their particular device. But I have the Xcode export options plist, which is handy. So let's go forward. Again, I will go forward and run the same Xcode build command. And this time around, I will go forward and say that I want to export the archive. Like I said, okay, I want to export archive. I need to tell where the archive is present, which I want to export. And that archive is actually present in build lecture 7 XC archive. Okay, so I gave the path to the archive. I go forward and talk about what my export path looks like. And my export path is directory, which is dot slash build. And then I have to tell it where is my export options plist file. Okay, and that's the plist file we just saw. So I'm going to specify that. I do all this, I press the enter key, and you can see that it's actually going forward and exporting the archive, and export has succeeded. So let's open it again and see what happened. Not much action here, but in the build directory now have suddenly got so many files which is created. There's an app thinning report which has been created. It talks about different device variants, and it shows that okay, for what all variants the app thinning was actually performed. So it did it for all those devices. It created app thinning plist, which actually lists down all the files and how they were actually how the output of the actual compression look like. It has a distribution summary playlist. It has my original export options playlist, and it has a packaging log, which is also present again. So all good there. Now, the actual apps is present here under the apps directory. It's lecture7.ipa, and that's the IPA you're going to take and submit to the AppStore. Now, it's not an IPA that you can site deploy on your device currently. And that's because your devices will not take app signed by every profile. But yes, you could have created even IPS that can be site deployed on the device. But if as long as you have the right certificates which are present, this is development certificate, so this one is not going to work. But this is good enough IPA to go forward and submit. Now Apple is going to probably reject it because I signed method was development rather than production. But you get the idea. You can change it to the right certificate profile, and you can go forward and submit to the Apple App Store. That's pretty much what you need to know about how to use the continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline, and could be Jenkins, could be different to actually go forward and create your IPS using scripting.